Baseball season has just a couple of weeks left to go. We'll get into the playoffs and the World Series. You can listen to them all right here on 97.3 ESPN. Let's talk some baseball with Seth Everett from NBC Sports Radio, the 24/7 live sports talk network. You can listen at NBCSportsRadio.com. Seth, welcome back, my man. How you been?
Well, yeah, it's funny. We haven't done this for a couple of weeks, and I don't think the Phillies have won a game since a couple of weeks. So
right. They're blaming us.
That's what it feels like.
They are blaming us. 5.5 back. They got the Braves coming up. Will these games be interesting, or is this thing wrapped up?
I mean, you got to sweep, you know, and that's incredibly hard. It's just that you dug your own hole. I mean, this is a team. You know, I hate to be the "I told you so" guy, but I said when it came to this division, there were two teams that were in uncharted territory, and I said to you, and I remember this exact moment. When I said to you, I would not be surprised if one of these teams falls off the face of the earth for a couple of weeks. That's what happened.
Yeah,
that was it. They just they hit the max. I thought, you know, Gabe Kapler and his psychobabble got a little strange when he said that he thought this team was better than the team that was in first place. I really don't think that's true, and I don't think that you can fool people into thinking that's true. My attitude has been. All along, I have looked at this from a standpoint of this is a huge stepping stone for the franchise. The franchise is headed in the right direction. If it's not at the rate that we are looking at, you have an interesting time in this division because Washington's in a transition. Atlanta looks like they're going to be the class of the division for a long time, and then there's always the Mets, which you never know because they have all that pitching.
I want to ask you this. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well,
it's an interesting time for the Phillies, but this was definitely a season where if you look where you started and you look where you're finishing, you'd sign for that in a heartbeat.
You probably would, but we've been discussing this a lot. I want to get your take on this because you tell it like it is, Seth. And I mean, okay, the Phillies are better than expected. We didn't expect that they would be in this race. They're going to win more games. What did we really learn about this team, though? Like, if we move forward and say, all right, they had a good year. They were right there until mid-September. This is what I now know. Like, I'm having a hard time saying I learned a lot about this team.
Well, but you're not talking about a team that's a bunch of aging guys that their best years are behind them. It's an up-and-coming young group. There's a nucleus in that lineup. There's a nucleus on the mound. You have a guy who is not going to win the Cy Young Award, but he's a Cy Young contender, which is a testament to a great season. He has emerged now as a bona fide all-star. You have a couple of pieces. This team has holes. They have goals now for the wintertime. And to me, that's what you've learned. The reality of it is I thought sub 500 this year or maybe 500. I said that to you when we were on in April, and I have been impressed. I was not a huge supporter of the managerial hiring, but they seem to make it work. And, the Phillies seem to be really behind who they hired, and you can't really argue with it. But that being said, Washington's not going to stink forever. The Mets are going to be better, and Atlanta's the class of the division right now, and they're super young because what happened to the Phillies could have easily happened to the Atlanta Braves, and that's the shame of it is that you had an opportunity. Seasons don't come around, you have to take advantage. It's the Dan Marino theory. When Dan Marino says, I'll be back in the championship game, this isn't a big deal. And he never got back. And you never know when, you're going to get back. And you don't know what the future is going to hold. But this team made strides, and all I can do is call it like I see it.
Seth Everett is with us as the Phillies kind of limping down the stretch, as you mentioned. Everybody talked about August when they had a lot of games against the Marlins and the Mets, and they just couldn't get it done. In the end, the Mets and the Marlins really wrecked this team's season. I mean, when you look at it, they couldn't beat those two teams, but it was in the month of September where they have really fallen off against those same two teams. In the end, the difference, Seth, the difference maker in this division was the Braves destroyed those two teams, and the Phillies simply couldn't beat them.
Correct. It really comes down to that. And, we talk about beating the teams that are on your schedule. you can't look at those games as anything other than missed opportunities. The Boston Red Sox have 100 victories because they killed the Baltimore Orioles. You know what I mean? Like that.
Yep.
That's an inflated number for the same reason.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. The Marlins are hapless. I mean, the Marlins are a mess of an organization, and they came in and they were world beaters.
Right. They essentially decided this division. Those two teams decided this division.
And Tampa is very interesting because Tampa is deciding the American League wild card because they're playing Oakland and the Yankees in the final 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they're deciding it. But Tampa's not a slouch. Tampa's no joke.
No.
You know what I mean? They're not in the playoffs.
They're 19 games over 500.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to get your take on this before we let you run. Seth Everett from NBC Sports Radio covers Major League Baseball. What's your thought on Matt Klentak? Like, he's like a mystery guy. It's almost like he was, nobody was judging him or saw him do anything for the first couple of years. And I don't know to think if he's the right guy, a bad guy, a good guy. What kind of job or trust do you have in Matt Klentak?
Well, I think it's more of they have embraced the modern wave of baseball. And, one of these days you and I are going to have a conversation about the union and how the union is going to try to preserve baseball the way we remember it. And I think Matt Klentak is a part of that new wave. It's that new wave of thinking sabermetrics play a major role. The shift is a major factor. They talk about compartmentalizing, run production, and, the days of the superstar are over. And, it's part of that new wave of baseball. And, you can't say that Matt Klentak's doing anything that David Stearns isn't doing in Milwaukee, and he's getting praised. So it's this new wave of baseball, and you're either getting on board with it or you're not. And, you look around the sport and you see all these young managers. That's the first tell. Bob Nightingale did a great piece in USA Today about the declining salaries of managers. And it's an amazing. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's an amazing group of statistics on what managers made just 5 years ago. And because of that, these young guys are getting hired, for much less money because they have diminished the value of the manager. And Matt Klentak's part of that. But so is, the Red Sox with Alex Cora and Aaron Boone and Callaway and Dave Roberts in L.A. and Torey Lovello and Craig Counsell. All these guys, they're all the same. And it's all the same thing. The difference was Kapler was this unique communicator. I've told you my history where when he was a player, I thought he was an amazing soundbite because you never knew what he was going to say next. And this is part of the line of reasoning that he had. And it's one of those things where I think that they are combined. But if you believe in that philosophy and baseball stays the course of where I fear it's going, I think Matt Klentak's going to be there for a while.
He's Seth Everett, everybody, and we'll talk baseball throughout the playoffs, the World Series. You can hear the playoffs in the World Series right here on 97.3 ESPN. NBC Sports Radio, check them out, the 24/7 live sports talk network. You can listen at NBCSportsRadio.com. All right, pal, we'll talk again soon.
You got it, Mike. I'll talk to you soon.